This is episode 45 of the Why Not Me podcast. What is identity? I'm your host, Danita Bremer. I'm a wife, mom, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a life coach. And I believe when you know who you are, you can be the best at what you're called to do. This requires faith, wisdom, and mental wellness. That's what we talk about here. Okay, so I always think it's kind of funny when I randomly see a scene from a movie or a show that my kids are watching that directly applies to the podcast episode that I want to record. A couple days ago, my kids turned on The Emperor's New Groove, and I don't watch TV. Very, very rarely do I watch TV or a movie. Every once in a while, I'll sit down. But sometimes as I'm walking by, doing my thing, something will catch my eye and I'll stop and watch for a couple of minutes, whatever they're watching. And so they had just started The Emperor's New Groove. It was right at the very beginning. And it was when Hercules found out that he was quote unquote adopted. And his parents said, this necklace, this medal came with you. It's the sign of the gods. And so he went on this kind of pilgrimage to go to the gods, and he comes into the shrine, and it's the statue of Zeus, giant, sitting there. And he bows down and he says, dear gods, who am I and what is my purpose? And I just watched that and I thought, oh my gosh, isn't that like the question all of us are searching for the answer to? This is the existential question. Who am I and what is my purpose? When I was in life coach training, it was when I did it 3 years ago, it was a full week in-person training. And I remember them telling us to not pick a niche that had to do with feeling not enough. And immediately when I heard that, I was like, that's what I want to coach on. Now, I followed their instructions. I didn't pick a niche. I didn't pick that as my niche. But over the last 3 years, since that life coach training, I have circled around this question of, why do I feel like I'm not enough? And really the flip side of that coin of I'm not enough is, who am I? Am I enough? Right? And also earlier this week, so this is part of the synchronicities of being, I guess, a content creator and trying to follow the spirit with your content creation, noticing things that go together. So earlier this week, I was reading in my scriptures in the Book of Mormon in Mosiah about chapters 10 through 13, somewhere in there. And this is the part of the scriptures where Zeniff passes away. Zeniff was righteous. He was the leader, the king of his people, and his son Noah becomes the king, and Noah is wicked. And so I read the chapter where Zeniff was still alive, and it was describing how the people had this time of peace, even though the Lamanites kept attacking. They had about 22 years of peace, and it outlined exactly what they did in order to have that peace. They kept the commandments, they worked, they were industrious, and they kept guards on the edge of their land to watch for the Lamanites and to fight them. They made weapons in order to defend themselves. And that came in stark contrast to when Noah became the king. And like I said, he was wicked. I think there's a quote in there somewhere that says he walked after the desires of his own heart. He didn't keep the commandments. He, had riotous living, harlots, and, whatever. And he got lazy about guarding his land. And at some point in there, in those chapters, I apologize. I didn't do all the research, but I'm going to put that on you. If you feel so inclined to read these scriptures, I encourage you to search these chapters and see what comes up for you. But there's somewhere in there that he said, this is when Abinadi comes to preach and tell them to repent and all of that. He says, who is God? Who is Abinadi to judge me? Right. And so he's thinking like he's so great. And, God can't touch him kind of thing. And it just struck me because I was thinking about this concept of who am I? And I just thought, oh, that's so fascinating that at least the way it seems that Noah was asking this question was insinuated that it's almost like a sign of wickedness to ask who is God, because we have so much evidence of who God is, right? We have scriptures that says, I am that I am, and that, I'm your father, and, I'm a creator of all things. So we know who God is. The real question is, who am I? Right. And so if you're asking who is God, or who is my bishop, or my stake president, or the prophet of the church, or, some church leader, when we ask ourselves, who are they to do XYZ or to say this or that? It's just a little sign that we're asking the wrong question, I think, if we want to be righteous and do what God wants for us, and like become the best version of ourselves. So when we ask instead, who am I? That, I think, my personal belief is that is the question of life. Now, I Googled to look up the actual definition of identity. Like, what even is identity? And I came up with some very unsatisfactory phrases and definitions. Who someone is, the name of a person. I mean, that kind of, is like, what's your identity, like on your driver's license, right? Your name, your stats, how tall you are, what color are your eyes and your hair, and that kind of thing. That is a piece of it, but that's like the most shallow part of our identity, right? The other definition was the qualities, beliefs, etc., that make a particular person or group different from others. I found that one kind of interesting because it means like what sets us apart, what makes us different. Another definition was the distinguishing character or personality of an individual. So this one is talking about like what makes you you, what characteristics or personality traits make you you. The psychological orientation of the self in regard to something, such as a person or group, with a resulting feeling of close emotional association. So it's kind of like we emotionally associate with our families. I am a Bremer, right? And so I have a close emotional association with the Bremers. That's who I am. And the last one I found was a largely unconscious process whereby an individual models thoughts, feelings, and actions after those attributed to an object that has been incorporated as a mental image. So this came under the definition of identification instead of just identity. I thought it was interesting, but I liked the part that says largely unconscious process. I liked how it said thoughts, feelings, and actions, because that goes along with the model that I use in my work. And I like how it mentioned this mental image. I think a big part of identity and how we identify is our own mental image of ourselves. I really kind of think that identity is kind of like a black hole. We can't define it directly, but we can define it by what it's not and how things function around it. So, if you are familiar at all with astronomy and black holes are this like intense gravitational point where it pulls everything in toward it, even light. So you can't actually see a black hole, but you can see how things act around the black hole, right? How like things are bent toward the black hole, how the light is bent toward the black hole. And I think that's how identity is too. It's very amorphous. It's hard to kind of like really identify, except that when we're looking at ourselves, sometimes it's easier to identify, well, define it by what we're not, right? So it's just kind of interesting to think about that definition. In my intro to the podcast, the new intro, it says, when you know who you are, you can be the best you at what you do. And I just want to say that that is 100% Danita Bremer right there. That is not something I heard from someone else. That is something that through journaling and reflection and thinking, I came up with that. And I do believe that's true. I think often what creates the resistance, the exhaustion, the confusion, the conflict, those kinds of things for us is that we're not acting in line with who we really are. And part of that is because we don't really know and understand who we really are. I feel like the first half of our lives, we're learning about the world and our place in it. And we're not really, I mean, some people are probably bent more toward this disposition, but we're not really concerned so much with who am I, although I do think that is kind of an unconscious driver. It's more like, how does the world work? How do I survive the world? Where's my place? What do I do? What do I not do? Right. So we're so concerned with those kinds of things that we don't think about, who am I? What do I like? What are my natural attributes and desires and all those kinds of things. This is where a concept like people pleasing comes in. We spend so much time trying to make other people happy and very little time trying to make ourselves happy because of often the expectations or rules of the outer culture. And when I say outer culture, like culture is so many different levels, right? It could be family culture, it could be church culture, it could be the culture of the United States or whatever country you live in, right? And I think things like anxiety and depression, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes are a result of stepping and being so far away from ourselves. I kind of, as I reflect on my life, this is actually really interesting. I was a really good student. If you've listened to previous podcast episodes, you know that I graduated valedictorian of my graduating class. I went to college. I have a degree. But in many ways, my high school and college careers were kind of the worst parts of my life. Now, in many ways, that's also not true. It was fun and it's kind of hard to say, but in a way, I think because those teenage young adult years are when you are figuring out kind of by default who you are, separate from your parents and your family life. So in that way, it wasn't the worst thing ever, but it was like a really tiring, exhausting time for me. And now that I have the knowledge I have and I've learned so much through life coaching and just self-development in general, I think it's because our education system basically teaches you the opposite of what I want to teach you, which is that you don't have the answers. The teacher or something or someone outside of you has the answers. But in real life, you have the answers for you. They're inside of you. That's like what makes us all unique individuals, right? And I think, and there are other things too that the education system teaches us, like it's bad to fail, but really the only way to learn is to fail. I mean, you can learn, quote unquote, learn from kind of a book smart kind of way. You can add knowledge to your mind. That is different, I think, with a little bit of perspective now that I have. That is different than actual learning, like experiential learning. And I kind of, now that I know myself a little bit better, and I know that I'm sort of this heart-centered, um, service-oriented person, that doesn't really jive with an education system that requires you to sit down and listen and, um, like I said, that the answers are outside of you. It's just a really interesting thing to think about. And the other thing that came up as I was outlining this episode was that I think manipulation, what we typically think of as manipulation, when somebody is trying to get you to do something that they want you to do, basically that is trying to get others to act out of line with who they really are to appease you or to make you happy, right? So gaslighting and things like that are a form of manipulation. But I just see so much evidence in our world of how the struggle in life, the suffering in life comes when we aren't acting in line with who we really are. Right. And there's a lot to that. There's like, how do we know how to act in line with who we really are? We have to know who we really are, right? We have to know what feels good to us. And that's what I think it boils down to is whatever feels good, whatever feels grounded, open, light, abundant. These are sort of airy fairy terms, but physically in your body, whatever feels good is what is in line with who you really are. No matter what you do in this world, if you have a business, if you're a mom, if you're a wife, if you have a calling, if you work in corporate, whatever it is you do, you're going to be better at that thing when you know what you're good at and what you how you're naturally wired and just how you naturally are. I can't remember who this quote is from, but I think about in relation to this, I think about the image of the fish in a tree, right? Somebody said, if we define a fish by his ability to climb a tree, he will fail every time, right? And this is sort of how I think of the education system, to be honest. It's this very narrow view of what it means to learn and succeed. A fish can't climb a tree. That's not a fish's natural inclination. It's not how they're built. If we're talking about a monkey here, then it's a totally different story, right? So then the question becomes, is it the individual is ill prepared or bad or flawed in some way, or is it the environment, right? And I think this is the question of identity. How do we learn who we are, how we're built, how we're wired, however you want to think of that, and then suit our identity to that? Or not suit our identity, suit our environment to that. When we try to do things the way we think it should be done instead of the way that feels right to us, because that's who we are, we'll go off track every time. Sometimes the way we think we should do things and the way we are just happen to be the same thing, right? Oh, so and so said I should do this. And it lines up with my natural abilities and talents and personality and whatever, right? It's like ding, 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 lucky you. That's why some people, I think, find their calling, their purpose early in life. What I should do, or maybe it's just that they follow those, like, this feels really good to me, this feels really natural, I want to do this. They follow that. They're more true to that. But obviously sometimes what we should do, what the world says we should do, is conducive to who I am. And that person is we could call it lucky, whatever, right? They probably see success a little easier. There's a book called Atomic Habits. The author's name is James Clear, and it's one of my favorites because I love talking about, habits and improvement. It's very much a book in the world of self-development. But the thing I love and the thing that I learned the most from reading this book is the importance of identity. Now, in order for us to create the life we want, to create the results we want in our lives, it requires some action. It requires us to have certain kinds of habits or, just certain kinds of actions. But sometimes we focus a little too much on the action and we don't ask ourselves what creates the actions or the habits, like what kind of makes those specific actions or habits that I think is going to get me to the result I want conducive. I would submit to you that the feelings create our actions. And I'm pretty sure I've used this example earlier in the podcast, but it's such a good one that I'm going to use it again. When we feel sick or down, we're so much less likely to exercise, right? If we feel motivated and energized, then exercising is going to be way easier. So the feelings, not that they necessarily create our actions, but they sort of drive our actions. They fuel our actions. And then the question becomes, well, what creates the feelings? I think it's oftentimes thoughts, at least in this context of where we're trying to be intentional about what we are creating in our life. I recognize that feelings oftentimes create thoughts. It goes the other way around, or that feelings are created in our bodies without thoughts happening. I totally get that. That's like on the subconscious, unconscious level, right? When we're like forward focused, we're moving toward a goal, something like that, it's the thoughts that create the feelings. And I'm just going to ask one more time, what creates our thoughts? Where do those thoughts come from? I think those thoughts come from our beliefs, and specifically our beliefs about how the world works and who we are in the world. So really, if I'm looking at the model, and if you are somebody who came to this podcast because you already know about the model, I think there's sort of a hidden or a missing line there. We say CTFAR, C for circumstance. Those are the facts in the world. They don't cause our thoughts or our feelings, but they do trigger our thoughts or our feelings. I think first we would go to like, then, it triggers a thought, creates a feeling, drives an action, produces a result, right? Between that circumstance line and the thought line, I think there's actually a belief line. Beliefs are a little bit more embedded. They are more subconscious. And I think these beliefs about how the world works and who we are in the world really is the real starting point here. Which means that I've come up with my own definition of identity based on this thought that I have. I think identity is your beliefs and your feelings about yourself. And as I turn this around in my mind, and I'm totally not an expert here. I don't have any like scientific proof or backing. This is just things that I've thought about based off of years and years of experience in the world. And of course, I've read lots of books and listened to lots of podcasts and all of that. But I, going back to that quintessential question of who am I and what is my purpose, I don't think that our job here on earth is so much about figuring out our purpose or deciding on a purpose or taking a specific action. It's like there's certain kinds of art forms, for example, drawing or painting, where we take a blank canvas of some kind and we add to it. We add the paint and we shape the paint, whatever. There are other kinds of art forms like sculpture where we subtract from it. And I think that's what identity is. I think identity is more about figuring out who you're not because of the way the world works is why I say this. I mean, a child who comes into the world, they are who they are, right? They come with so much personality and natural quirks and all of that. I mean, I have 3 kids and they both came from the same mother, the same father, grew up in the same house. They're very different from each other. There's some things that are the same, but I think this discovery, this journey we're on in this earth life is about like the first several years of our life. We get things added to us from the outer culture and our parents and school and all the things, right? TV, whatever. And our real job is to figure out what part of that doesn't align, right? Well, there's a core underneath that. And it's like who we are, it's our true identity. And our job is to subtract all of the fears and inadequacies and worries and like insecurities, right? All of the programming that came from outside of us through life to figure out who we are. I am currently in what I call a season of subtraction. I feel like a hermit, like I want to just sort of spend all day learning and writing and not being around people, and this kind of comes and goes in waves. But I've been really asking myself, like, what is essential? This is, the Greg McKeown essentialism, effortless kind of paradigm. What is the most essential thing for me in my life right now, for the things that I want to accomplish, the impacts that I want to make? Who am I essentially? And so I've been subtracting things. I've been not listening to as many podcasts, not reading as many books, taking myself out of coaching programs that have like lifetime memberships, or even unsubscribing, unfollowing on social media, not spending as much time on social media, things like that. This season of subtraction, because I'm really feeling this deep desire to create. And I don't consider myself a writer yet, but I've been feeling this pull to write. And as I write, I try to do this every day for 30 minutes. I notice that I do have lots of ideas that have just been waiting to kind of come out and place themselves in my awareness. And so it's like I'm putting myself in this cave and like everybody stay out kind of thing. Not totally like that, but just I feel this desire to listen to my own self, right? And I think that is what the journey of this life is all about. My personal opinion is that I think God wants us to become the biggest version of ourselves that we can. I think that's what he wants for everyone. I think it's kind of a universal truth. I mean, just imagine. Maybe this is what heaven is like, a place where everyone gets to be their full selves unapologetically, and they are welcomed and celebrated for that. Everyone belongs in their full selves, whatever that is. That like really lights me up. That excites me, right? To think of a world like that where we are all accepted and welcomed and we all belong in the version of ourselves that is our full expression of ourself. And I just realized a couple days ago, I'm like, that is the work I want to do in the world. I want to help people figure out who that is. I want to help people. Sometimes it helps to talk it out. Sometimes it helps to do certain exercises or reflections. Honestly, I think what helps the most is learning how to feel, because our self is expressed with our desires, with our feelings, right? Like kind of how I said, what feels right in our bodies is what is in alignment with us. And I think that can change over time. It's not like a static thing that like, this is what feels right to me and it will always feel right. It's the kind of like just following the flow of what feels right is what will take us to where we're supposed to be, and our purpose and who we are and our callings and our work in the world. Right. So that's what like really lights me up. That's what I want to help people with. And I want to say too, especially stay-at-home moms. I find that there is a lot of information geared toward business people or entrepreneurs or artists, kind of these different kinds of archetypes. But I feel like moms, especially like stay-at-home moms, that's their primary focus, is teaching and nurturing children and being the gatekeepers of the families. It feels to me like there are less concrete resources. And that's what I want to do. I want to help moms figure out who they are so that they can be the best moms and wives and sisters and daughters that they can be. And we're all different. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. And like, that's a beautiful thing that creates this beautiful tapestry of life. Right. And I think so often we get tripped up on this is what the culture says I should do or be. And what I just want to say is ignore that. Shut it off, shut it down. La la la, put your fingers in your ears. La 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 la. And really listen to yourself. Listen to your own heart, your own mind, your own intuition, your own gut, like whatever those words are that resonate with you, listen to that because that is what is going to show you the way. Okay, that's enough for now. And so are you. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this episode made you think of yourself in a new way, would you please give it a rating and a review? And if you want to truly do the work of being the best you at what you do, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free session. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.